Welcome everybody to our webinar on humanizing online teaching. In other words, showing our students that we aren't just computers. So we're going to be going over a lot of strategies today, a lot of ways that you can increase your instructor presence in the online classroom. This is something that happens pretty naturally in a face-to-face class, but in online environments, it takes a little bit of strategy to make that happen. So I wanted to start with the question of what is humanizing? And actually, I want to start with a question of what is not humanizing. So I'm going to start with a video made by a student for a student project. And in this video, he shares his experience as an online student and kind of keep this idea of humanizing, of establishing a human presence in mind when you look at what he created.
I'm a student. This is my routine. Every morning, I get up. I make my way to school. I come here for an education. Seeking knowledge. This is what I find. Day after day. This is all I find. Day after day. This is what I find. If you wouldn't neglect me in a classroom with desks and a chalkboard, why would you do it to me in a classroom with a keyboard and a screen? Am I paying tuition for a bunch of notes on a board? Education and teaching is more than a few reading assignments. It's time for a change.
Whew, that gets me every time I watch it. So one of the things we're going to focus on today is the asynchronous ways that we can humanize a course, that we can teach our students, even if it isn't at the same place at the same time of day. And I think that strategy is going to be able to reach out to our students wherever they are or whatever time they're logging in. So keep this student in mind and his frustrations, his feeling like he's just logging in and being told to read something without really being taught anything. And so that is something that we're going to be trying to address as we go over some strategies today. So first I wanted to talk about a little bit of research into this topic. And this comes from a 2015 study in California community colleges in particular. It's a really great read. If you haven't read it before, you'll see that there's a link down here at the bottom that you can access when I send you the slides. So it was on social presence of the instructor and how the students felt that impacted their learning. And what they found was that a student's perceived learning, how much they felt they learned in the class, was correlated with how much of a social presence there was in the course. So if they felt like it was an active learning environment and the instructor was present and working with them, they felt that they learned more. So that's kind of subjective, right, what they felt. But a second study in the second bullet here found that students actually performed better on assignments and tests in those kinds of environments. So they feel like they're learning more, and they also are doing better grade-wise. So that's kind of a win-win for us. I wanted to bring in one other study that has actually been cited a lot recently. It's gotten a lot of attention. It also focused on online community college students, but it wasn't limited to just California. It was a national study, although I believe it was a couple of colleges that were the focus. And so these researchers looked at the impact of 4 elements that are often cited as really important in online education. So they looked at these 4 elements, and they looked at 23 different courses total. They were all fully online community college courses. And these were the areas that they were looking at: organization and presentation in the course. So how well organized it was, how well the instructor presented the content, learning objectives and assessments, interpersonal interaction, and use of technology. So they were looking at the impact of each one of these on the course. And what they found was that interpersonal interaction was the most important factor in predicting grades. So students who were in a high interaction class did better. Students who were in a low interaction course earned about 1 letter grade lower than their peers in the higher interaction courses. And here is a chart from their study. So a class that had little personal interaction had an average score in this area all the way up to the strong interpersonal interactions. And these interpersonal interactions can be one-on-one with instructor and student. They could be opportunities for students to interact and work with each other. It was the level of interpersonal interaction that was built into the class. So thinking about that, I'm bringing in one idea here that was from this same study, that when the students were asked, they said that an instructor who cared about their learning was really what drove their success. So feeling like the student was there, or the instructor was there and was on their side and was ready to help them, had a really huge impact from their perspective on their success. And so, whoops, sorry about that. And so when we teach in a face-to-face class, we can communicate really clearly how much we care about our students, right? They can see our facial expressions, they're listening to our enthusiasm in our voice, they are paying attention to our body language, and they can tell how much their instructors care about their learning. They can tell how engaged their instructors are with the class. But in an online environment, that's a lot more challenging, and it really has to be deliberately developed in order for students to see it. So that video we were just looking at, that instructor could care very deeply about his or her students, but there's no way to tell, there's no way to see that from what's actually in the class. And so that's where humanizing comes in. It's really a deliberate plan to make the class an interactive and nurturing place for students to learn. So here's a definition that we might want to think about as we move into talking about how to do this. Humanized learning increases the relevance of the content for the students, and it improves their motivation to log in week after week. When students relate to an online instructor as something more than a subject matter expert, and begin to conceive of themselves as part of a larger community, a learning community in that class, then they're more likely to be motivated, to be satisfied with their learning, as we saw in some of those studies, and they're more likely to succeed in achieving the course objectives. So that's really at the heart of what we're talking about, how we can get students to feel like they are part of an online community, which is really vital to their impressions of how much they learn, to their motivation to finish the course, and to their success at the end of the course. So knowing all that, I want to talk about some ways that we can accomplish this. How to humanize. This is an infographic. I'm going to put the link in the chat for you right now. There you go. So this is an infographic that's all about humanizing. It's actually even bigger than this. I'll show you the part 2 in a minute. But I wanted to zoom in and just focus on this part here. You'll see that definition we just looked at is in the middle. And in terms of facilitating a course, so not planning the course, but when we teach it, there are 3 key areas to humanize an online class. One of them is the instructor presence. So making it visible to students that you are there with them, so they don't think the class is taught by a computer. And you'll see some options for how you can do that. Videos are very important, so students can see and hear you. That really shows them that they do have an instructor. You could greet students with videos regularly throughout the semester. Let them see you at the beginning of the semester, a few weeks later, to remind them that you are actually a living person. And then offering synchronous meetings for those who need them is certainly an option. Even if they don't take advantage of it, it is an option that you can provide. Empathy is another one of those things that is very clear in a face-to-face class, but you have to be more intentional about in an online class. So in a face-to-face class, if a student comes to you and they need some extra support with a course concept or with an assignment, they can read your body language, they can hear the tone in your voice and determine whether or not you understand their situation and understand what they need. But when you're just typing emails back and forth, that is a lot more difficult. And students who are feeling a little bit insecure about their about the course, about their ability to succeed in it, about their academic future, are more likely to read into text a negative impression. So they're more likely to assume the worst when they read an email from us. And so it's good to find ways from the very beginning to try to show students that you are approachable, that you will support them. So reaching out proactively at the beginning and saying, if you have any problems with this, give me a call, let me know, here's how I can help. Last semester, here's what I did with some students, it really worked. Let me know if you want to try it this semester, to just show them that you are engaged, that you get it might be difficult, and that you're there to help with it. And then the last one in facilitation here is awareness, knowing who your students are. In an online class, a lot of times, especially in the beginning, our students are just names on a roster. So how do you get beyond that to get to know them individually? An icebreaker discussion is crucial for that, because then students get to introduce themselves, talk with other students, talk with you without course content or a formal grade being attached to it. Another great idea, which I've started using recently, is having a student survey in the first week of the class. And in this survey, which you could use Google Forms to create, ask them some key questions that help you get to know them. So you could ask something like, what's their career goal, or why are they interested in taking the class? But you could also ask, is there anything you're concerned about in taking this class? And then you can get a handle on which students might need some extra support in which areas. You also could ask them something as simple as how to pronounce their first name. And that way, when you are providing video feedback for them, or you're going to have a phone call with them, you can make sure you're saying their name correctly, which is really powerful. Even though you might know your students really well, if you don't know how to say their name, it's creating the impression that you don't. So that's a great question to ask in the beginning as well. And then because it is a Google form, it automatically displays for you in a spreadsheet. So it's very easy at a glance for you to go back during the semester, refresh your memory when you need to about these things that you asked your students to share with you. So those are a couple of ideas for when you're facilitating the course. like I mentioned, there is more to this that goes over things like how you can build humanizing elements into the design of the course. You'll see that some of the options there are to give your students lots of choice so that they can choose an option that works well for them, to give your students control over some aspects of the class, to build in collaboration, and so on. And then there's more on the other side of this infographic as well about some of the theory behind those recommendations. So you can get your own copy of this. It is Creative Commons licensed. You can print it out, you can display it, you can share it however you'd like. It does have a CC BY license. All right, so getting a little bit more specific here, let's talk about some of the humanizing behaviors that you could start to integrate into your courses. And some of you, I have a feeling, are already doing some of these. They'll look a little familiar to you, and you can just pat yourself on the back when you see those. But hopefully there are a few that you haven't thought of before. So first off, just communicating that you are committed to your students is more important than you would think. You might think it's pretty obvious because you wouldn't be a teacher if you weren't committed to your students. But sometimes students have had pretty negative experiences where they're convinced their instructors did not care about teaching the class, about students. And so actually saying your commitment to your students can make a big difference in the beginning, maybe in the welcome letter, for example. Being present in the course in some way multiple times throughout the week is really important so that students can see that you're actually in there with them. Encouraging students to ask questions and making sure that when you do respond to those, you do so with a positive tone. If you have a frustrated tone, your students will never ask a question again. But if it's a positive tone, they're more likely to feel comfortable asking questions. This one, maybe people haven't really thought much about. Being clear about how you wish to be contacted, like what's your preferred method of contact, and about how quickly you'll respond to students. This shows that you've been thinking about interacting with students and that you have a commitment to interacting with them within those parameters. So that shows them that this is something that you're invested in, and then they're more likely to take advantage of it. Referring to students by name when possible. So in the classroom, we already know the power of this, right? You use a student's name, they really perk up and they're paying attention and they're engaged. In an online class, we can do that in a discussion, right? We can respond to them by using their name, and that is certainly helpful. We can also refer to students by name when we're responding to another student in a discussion. So maybe you would say something like, hey, this idea really reminds me of what Javier said about blah, blah, blah. You're connecting these two students together. You're showing that you paid attention to what students had to say, not just the one you're responding to. And that really starts to feel like a genuine, in-depth discussion. Something that I have found really powerful is when you do need to reach out to a student by email, by Canvas inbox, putting the student's name in the subject line gets an immediate response because they know right away this is not some canned email that you're receiving from your instructor who may or may not be a computer. This is something your instructor actually wrote for you, addressed it to you. Putting that name at the top really gets their attention. So that's a little strategy you might want to try. This is another one that we probably have all seen the power of in the classroom, which is making a mistake and acknowledging it, laughing at yourself if it's appropriate, apologizing if it's appropriate, and then moving on. Because you're modeling for students what it's like to be human and to make mistakes, and that gives students the courage to try new things and make mistakes too. So doing that in an online class might be in the form of an announcement. It might be an individual email to a student. But if you can find ways to acknowledge mistakes, to own them, and then to maybe model how you grow from making mistakes, that is really, really powerful in the classroom and online. But online students don't get to see that from us very much. And it's also a window into helping them relate to you. They feel like, oh, you're a human being who makes mistakes too. Okay, I can do this then. Then I can trust you. Giving regular feedback on assignments also shows your students that you're there with them. Sharing your stories. This is an interesting one. We're going to talk about that in just a second. I wanted to put one more thing with it, though, and that is not trying to be perfect, trying to just be human. So again, if you're making a mistake, use it as an opportunity to acknowledge that. In fact, make a mistake on purpose even, so that you've got a chance to show them that you're a human being. So instead of, reacting with horror that you put the wrong due date on an assignment, put the right due date on it, send them an announcement that's humorous and self-deprecating, and then they will appreciate that you fixed it, and they will love you for being willing to be human. So what have you guys found when you share the stories? What happens?
I think it helps too for them to be honest with us, about things when we share something, especially if it was some issue we had, like I'm child development. So if we were doing observations, how there's problems and challenges with that. And so when I share that, then they're more apt to be honest about that. Yeah, it wasn't that easy. This happened and things like that too.
And that's so important for workplace skills, really, because when they start in their field, they're going to have challenges. And do they talk to people about them, or do they just, hope nobody notices that they look confused? Right? So we're modeling for them too, I think.
And also I tell them, don't put us on the pedestal, especially the higher it gets, the more difficult and painful it gets when we fall down, and we eventually do. So.
Yep, that's a really good thing to say. What I found with being a teacher of writing, which is a high stress topic for many students, is that in the beginning of the class, students are really just resigned to suffering through a class where people are going to tell them what a bad writer they are. And they don't want to connect with the instructor sometimes, because they just want to get their grades, try not to look at that feedback, just survive the class and move on, because it's a threatening, uncomfortable kind of situation for them because they're expecting to fail. And getting that personal connection going, getting them to trust me and to see that I can make a mistake and learn from it and recover from it and move forward from it seems to be really liberating for some of those students, because they see, oh, so I could actually try something, and if it doesn't work, it's okay. I'll learn how to do it better, and I'll just keep moving forward, versus I don't want to write very much because if there's a typo in there, then there goes my whole semester. I failed, right? I've actually had students tell me that before. When I ask them, well, why are you writing something that's so short? And they say, because the shorter it is, the fewer mistakes I'm going to make. But that's not the point. The point is to talk about your ideas and to develop them. And, trying to not make mistakes is no way to go through life. So sometimes they just really need to hear that from us, I think. But modeling it has a huge impact, I have found. The minute I can make a mistake, the sooner they're willing to really work with me.
Simple thing we can do for humanizing. And it's whenever a student expresses any problem to me, no matter what it is, the first thing I always do is give a feeling of sympathy reaction to it. Maybe we all do that, but that's something that I just can't believe the mileage you get out of that by simply saying, sorry, you're having trouble. Sorry to hear this. Before I go into solutions. So that seems to really work nice for me.
Yeah, I think that works for us too, right? If you think about any difficult situation you're in, just hearing that somebody hears you and acknowledges that, it makes a huge difference, especially if you're feeling emotionally spent or vulnerable. Yeah, I think that's powerful.
Yeah, and it's not a matter of taking responsibility or saying I'm to blame. It's just acknowledging it. Oops.
Unless you're a medical assistant or a nurse, and then you'll kill somebody. That's not very good, is it now?
I have not been in that situation. Although I have almost killed myself, because one of the things that I would do when I was teaching face-to-face classes often is I would always try to do something kind of klutzy, because I'm naturally klutzy anyway, so it's easy. But also because then students would laugh and I would laugh at myself, and that was like the icebreaker with them. That was it. The minute I could almost trip over an extension cord or almost fall over a desk and everybody could laugh was the minute that we started to work as a group, right? So one of the things that we started talking about, which I was hoping we would, I wanted to delve into a little bit more detail on. The book that you see here is Culturally Responsive Teaching and the Brain by Zaretta Hammond. It's a book that's come up in a lot of professional development events at our campus in the last year. And it is just a packed book. It has so many great insights into teaching. It's not specifically for online teaching, but I think a lot of what's in here can really speak to success in online teaching. And so one of the things that Hammond talks about is trust generators, she calls them. And so this quote from the book, trust generators are universal in their ability to help us feel an instant sense of connection. So that's what my klutziness did. It was an instant sense of connection. They felt a little sympathy for me. They felt comfortable with me because I wasn't perfect. And they liked that I could laugh at myself. So they were laughing with me, at me, but with me. And so that was an instant trust generator. And after that, everything got easier. So there are 5 that she talks about in her book. Selective vulnerability is one of them. And that's actually what I was doing. I was making myself vulnerable to my students so they could see that I was willing to take some risks and they were willing to take risks too. It also, of course, helped with that familiarity, right? They got to see me in an embarrassing situation. But telling stories can have that same sort of impact of both of those, right? If it's a story that you're sharing where you made a mistake or had a difficult time with something or failed and learned from it, then those stories also have that vulnerability in there. And then, of course, the familiarity comes anytime you tell stories. And a lot of times that's what students remember about us the longest. Long after they've forgotten what we taught them, they remember us as people. And I think a lot of that comes from stories and letting them get to know us. So that idea of selective vulnerability has this sentence in the area where she talks about it in the book. People respect and connect with others who share their own vulnerable moments. It means showing your human side that is not perfect. So that really gets to the heart of those strategies of telling stories. And if the stories are connected to a place where students are, even better. So if it's connected to online learning, if it's connected to facing challenges and overcoming difficulties, those really tend to resonate, especially at certain times of the semester when we're speaking with students. All right, so getting even more specific here, I wanted to talk a little bit about humanizing in Canvas, since we are talking about online classes. So one way to help students feel comfortable in the environment is to use multiple ways of communicating with them and also of communicating content. So a text-only environment tends to feel kind of sterile and stale, but adding in images can have a really big impact on students, including, of course, an image of ourselves so they can actually see the person that they're working with, but also images of things that are related to the class. And so, for example, I happen to know that a lot of child development instructors are using rich imagery to help students see the kind of situations that they are learning about. Images that you have collected yourself can be really powerful too. So if you have experience in the field that you're teaching, take pictures while you're out there. You always have your phone with you, right? Use it to take pictures, share those with your students, and now they see that they are learning from someone who's actually out there in the field. Works with video as well. Recording little videos is like mini field trips for students, and it really does help them more deeply understand the content. The people area in Canvas is really great for tracking students. So you can see at a glance how much time they've spent in the class, when they last logged in. And if you see that there's a gap there, it's an easy way to notice if somebody has been missing for a while. You also could use the student interactions report, which you can get to from that same area. And you can see students who you have and have not interacted with lately. It's a really nice way to, at a glance, see which students are getting lots of your attention and which ones maybe haven't been lately. Maybe it's because they're doing fine, but maybe a quick little check-in from you would make it feel like, you know, they're still connected to you. Message students who. So this is a fabulous feature. I think a lot of us are already using this. It's in the grade book, and when you're finished working on an assignment, on grading an assignment, you can use the little drop down to message students who haven't turned it in yet, scored a certain grade. you get to decide what the criteria it is and what the criteria is, and Canvas pulls all of those names into a list for you. You type the message, you send it out, and each student gets it individually. So you are connecting with each one of them individually, even though you're using a little technology to speed that process along. So you can certainly use that to nudge students who haven't turned something in, but you could also use it to push out resources or make some suggestions to students who didn't do so well. And I like to use it to give kudos to students who really did a fabulous job. And I can do it for several students at once just using this one tool. And by the way, when students respond to you, it responds just individually to you. So it feels like you're sending them an individual message, which you are in Canvas, and then they can respond individually to you. So nobody else is going to see that conversation. And then lastly, if you wanted to contact them one by one individually, the inbox is a good way to do that. And we were talking before about the power of using a student's name, which is why I put this image here. Think about how you could do something like what you see with the subject line here. So let's say that you have a student who had some questions or was uncomfortable or unsure about a paper that she was working on. You met with her. A few days later, you could follow up with an email just checking in to see how things are going. Or maybe there's a student who turned a paper in late last time, and you just want to check in with them before it's due this time to make sure that they plan on turning it in on time, that they're on track, see if they have any questions. Using the name in that subject line is most likely going to grab their attention. And so they'll open it right away. You're much more likely to get a fast response. And Felicity is asking in the chat, with the message students who, in that one you would not want to use their names if it's going to multiple people. If you use message students who and you deleted some of the other names and you're just using one, then you could use the name. So these are two different options that would have two different use cases. Then I want to talk a little bit about how you can use multimedia to help humanize a course, because that is a really big strategy. So one thing is you could use graphics like Canva here. So Canva is a really easy tool to use graphics. It was the focus of one of our webinars earlier this semester. It's actually the focus of my Can Innovate presentation, if you want to check that out on Friday. And creating graphics for your class does add that visual interest. It also helps to anchor key points because it puts them, you know, in some interesting visual and grabs students' attention. But you can also use these customized semester to semester if you wanted. So you could put a student quote in there, and maybe that's something you want to spotlight in the coming week. And then after you have that template done, next semester, if you want to do the same thing with a new student's comment, you could just go to Canva and type in the new words and save it and put it in your class. So there are all sorts of creative ways you could use Canva. Changing the course homepage regularly also convinces students that you are a real person and that the class is not a canned course. So the easy way to do that is from the Pages area. After you have your homepage made, go to Pages, copy that page, so you just duplicate it. Then you go in there and you put whatever the new stuff is going to be for the next unit of your class, the next month of your class, however you want to set it up. And once you have those different versions of your homepage saved, next semester, if you teach the class again, you just go in there and make a few updates, but your pages are already set. A lot of people like to use a different banner for each one of those. It could be a seasonal banner. It could be related to a unit that's being studied. So your class kind of has an updated feel to it, which helps students feel like the class is moving versus the same static homepage the whole semester. Video, of course, is a great way to help students connect with you. So you could make a short video just introducing yourself to your students. You could put that on the homepage. You could put it in your orientation module. And then you could record these during the semester too, just to, you know, keep connecting with your students as the course goes on. A course tour video is something I know a lot of us are using, where you personally walk your students through your class. That's nice because they get a sense of what they should be doing in this course. They get to hear their instructor's voice. It's a great time to bring in some humor, those corny jokes, Making a mistake actually could happen in this kind of video too, right? It could be a word that you mispronounce or leave out, or something humorous in terms of how you're speaking. Or maybe you could get your dog to bark behind you and you could bring your dog into the video. Pets are great humanizers too. You also could think about doing video lectures. Video lectures are a great way to let students learn in a way that's not text-based, because they get a lot of text in their textbook. And then when we put text into content pages too, that is a lot of text. So it's nice to break it up sometimes with video lectures. Those could be on the go, like we talked about, or they could be ones that you are deliberately recording in a more formal setting. And the professional development area has a new recording room. You'll be hearing about it later this semester. It's a setup so you can just go in there and record your video. There's a green screen in there if you wanted to have some fun with your background. And then you can leave with a copy of your recording, and then you can edit that in Camtasia or wherever else you'd like to edit it, and then upload it to your class. And then the last one is feedback videos. So using video to talk to your students about how they performed on the assignment, or suggestions you have for the next assignment or for revision, is great because they get to hear your tone of voice. They're not going to misunderstand. It's especially good if you need to tell them something that is a problem with the work, or something they really do need to focus on to be successful in the class. Hearing it is going to be a lot easier for them than reading it. So that's a great time to use video. I also like to use it when students have done a really great job and they can see me kind of cheering for them. Sometimes I'll bring in little props like noisemakers, or I'll give them a virtual high five up to the webcam, just to kind of, help celebrate with them. So this actually gets to one of Felicity's questions I see in the chat, which is, do all videos have to be captioned? The individual videos, like the feedback ones we're talking about, don't have to be unless that student needs captioning, because those are considered one-time use. If it's an instructional video like that course tour or the mini lecture, those you do want to get captioned because those are for the whole class and you're going to use them semester after semester. All right, so speaking of feedback, I wanted to talk in a little bit more depth about feedback in Canvas. So we talked a little about the message students who. That's a good way to give feedback. It is going to be basic text though, right? But it's a great way to keep the connections going with your students in a way that doesn't take a lot of time. Speed grade or annotations are another way that we can give in-depth feedback by putting comments on their paper, circling things, highlighting things, color coding comments. All of that is in the speed grader. Speed grader comments, which are in the comments area of the speed grader window, are the place where you can type a note to your students. You can use the speech to text there, and then you also can use video there. You also can attach files. And the nice thing about SpeedGrader comments is they're connected into notifications. And so the minute you leave a comment there, or your student leaves a comment around graded work, it's sent out to the other person. So if you make a comment, your student reads it, makes a comment back to you, both of you are getting notifications each time one of those comments happens. And I wanted to let you guys know that Campus has been working on redoing their video recorder within Canvas, including in the SpeedGrader. I got a sneak peek at it. It's going to be available to us at the end of this month. I think it's next week. And it is much, much better than it used to be. So you guys might remember that when we would try to record video within Canvas, the audio was really scratchy. That is completely gone now. What they did is they replaced the older technology of Flash with the newer technology of HTML5, which is something that VoiceThread did a couple of years ago as well. So it's very high quality video, very high quality audio. So we're now going to be able to go back to recording great videos within Canvas, which is fabulous for SpeedGrader videos. You'll just click the button, record it, save it, and then your students will just click it to watch it. And if you're kind of on the fence about video feedback, you maybe haven't done it before, you're not quite sure about it, I wanted to share some comments from students about video feedback. Again, we're focusing on humanizing here, right? And we're thinking about the impact that making a video for an individual student can have on that student. So the first one, the video feedback was a great touch and made the feedback feel a little more personal. Keep that in mind as you look at the second one. I really liked how the professor did video feedback about my essay, especially going over each step of what I could fix and work on. It felt like I was in class with her. All right, so two things there. One, they actually liked being told what they could fix and work on. When does that ever happen, right? So think about that. We have students who just can't even bear to look at the feedback because it's going to feel like such a criticism of them and their abilities, to a student who says, I love how you showed me what I needed to fix and what I could work on. And the difference there is in the video, they could hear the instructor's tone of voice. And the instructor wasn't having a tone of voice that said, drop out of college, you're through. The tone of voice was, hey, you've got some good stuff here. Here's how you can make it even better. If you look at the wording that we see in the other ones here, you're going to start to see a pattern of feeling like it's more personal, feeling like I was in class with the instructor. I felt as if she was talking to me directly, like we were in a classroom. It felt as if we were talking face to face. So that is really a common reaction for students who get video feedback. It does feel one-on-one because you made a video and you're talking to them. Especially if you're looking at the webcam, you're saying their name. So you don't have to do video feedback all the time, but even once, especially early in their semester, can have a huge impact on students. It can really make them feel like they've got a committed, engaged instructor who cares about them. And that pays dividends for the rest of the semester. So it's a couple minutes of investment for a huge payoff. All right, so we're getting close to the end of our hour, but I wanted to also introduce you to some resources for when you're ready to take a deeper dive into some of these topics. One of them is a web page that I have of sample videos. I'm going to pop out here and show this to you. And these are examples of instructor-created videos, just to give you some ideas, some things to think about. We talked a little bit about homepage videos just to welcome the students in. You'll find an example here. This one is an introduction to the instructor and to the course. This is a fabulous video. She actually recorded this over the course of a summer in different locations. So her instructors get to know her as a person while they're learning about the class. Course tour videos, you'll find an example of that. A sample announcement video. A sample video that is introducing an assignment using webcam, so students, just like face-to-face students, get to hear you talk about the assignment. Tends to really reduce the stress for students. Feedback, like we talked about, here's some video feedback, and the list actually goes on. There's quite a bit in here for you if you're just looking for some examples to think about. And then we also have some resources that come out of the workshop and webinar series and the Canvas training schedule. So in this semester's lineup is Feedback Fun with SpeedGrader, using Canva to make graphics for Canvas, and then VoiceThread, which is another very easy way for your students to use audio and video, and for you to work with them in audio and video as well. Then the Canvas training schedule, which is our local Canvas training, has some more details about some of the tools that we talked about today, particularly SpeedGrader for audio and video feedback, the Canvas gradebook for things like the Message Students Who, and others. And if you're really interested in this idea of humanizing in an online environment, @ONE has a new course. It just debuted this summer, or spring actually, and it's called Humanizing Online Teaching and Learning. I am happy to say that I am an occasional facilitator of this course. I was actually one of the first instructors to be trained in how to teach it, and it's wonderful. Some of the information I shared with you today comes from that course. So if you're interested in a deeper dive, it's 4 weeks of how you can use Humanizing, about how you can use additional tools like Flipgrid, Adobe Spark, and some others we didn't have a chance to talk about today, you could learn about in that class. And you can go to @ONE to register for that if you're interested. And lastly, you might want to think about kind of our ongoing professional development that you can use Twitter for. And I'm talking about specific uses of Twitter, not necessarily following some of the political tweets that we all hear about in the news. If you use this hashtag, for example, HumanizeOL, you'll see a lot of people who are interested in this topic who are sharing articles with each other, sharing sample videos with each other, and so on. So follow some people on Twitter who do a lot of work in online and in this particular topic, and you'll have great ideas just delivered to your doorstep every time that you go into Twitter. We are out of time for today, but I hope you found some strategies you can put into practice with your students. Happy humanizing!